Before we begin today's conversation, please know that we'll be discussing the serious risks social media poses to children and teens, the increase in youth suicide, and the mental health crisis. It is impacting all of us. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, showing sign of self-harm, disengagement with family, dramatic changes in sleep, and have severe anxiety, help is available. Call or text 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is available 24 hours, 7 days a week, or text HOME, that's HOME, to 741 for the crisis text line. These resources will also be listed in our show notes. Gracias. Welcome to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom, where wisdom comes from everywhere. This is a podcast about generational wisdom shared to help build a bridge for future generations and to build stronger communities through education, technology, and health. Welcome to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Hola, hola, gente. Today we are living in a very surreal time in our country. And what I mean by that is we are looking at our phones more than we ever have, and we are living in a constant fear of what is happening in our communities. Today, I would like to remind you that the social media and the phone are the things we have absolute control over, and how we modulate that information coming to us, how we take breaks, and also, most importantly, how we regulate the information to our children. Today's episode with my very special guest, Julie Scelfo, Executive Director and founder of Mothers Against Media Addiction. We will be talking about what has been happening over the years that has gone under the radar, but yet it is very much on the high radar of the bill that will be passing in the next few days, and that is around AI and technology. Today's platforms, as we know, as social media, does not age gate teens, although Instagram says they do. The platforms and the apps are still available to feed kids ads that are very harmful. We will also be talking about what parents can do to help safeguard their kids against information that is harmful. But the most important thing that you could do is just sit down and have a conversation about what they're watching. Again, this is not to leave our families in the digital divide and to be unconnected. It's how do we regulate the information and also hold this government accountable to what they are processing through these platforms, being unaccountable. There are no regulations, and what we need to do to help save our future human interactions and how we want to live in a society that will be safe for our kids in technology. So again, my guest today is Julie Scelfo, founder and executive director of Mothers Against Media Addiction. Welcome, Julie, to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. It is a privilege to have you here on the show, especially in this very contentious time, specifically around how people now are somewhat sheltering in place, like COVID, because of the ICE raids, also because people are online more than ever. And what we're going to talk about today in how to really keep not just children safe, but also everybody, and to give them some education around resources and services. And one of the things I want to highlight before we get started into this is how I met Julie at South by Southwest. If you don't know about that big event in Austin, Texas, it started out as a little kind of event, and now it's massive. It is a media, tech, and art conference. And what it does is it brings a lot of people together in various communities around the world to talk about things that are shaping the future. And one of the things that I found really interesting is podcasting. And podcasting, as we know today, is very dominant, white male dominated. And I saw very little women there. So, ladies, if you're a podcaster, especially women of color, men of color, I think it's very important for all of us to be showing up in these spaces to start talking about what we need to talk about in our communities and be active in a presence that tells people we're not going away. We're not afraid to speak our minds. That is our First Amendment right. And that is exactly what we're going to get into today, and how to be safe, how to protect our children. So, welcome, Julie. Thank you for that. Sorry for that long introduction. I just have what do you say, a bee in my bonnet right now.
I can't blame you. These are concerning times. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah. So, Julie, tell us about yourself, this moment of how you came into advocacy, and a little bit about MAMA, which is Mothers Against Media Addiction.
Sure. Well, most of my career, I've been a journalist. I was a staff writer at the New York Times, and before that, I was at Newsweek. And throughout my time at both places, I reported extensively on youth mental health and, unfortunately, suicide. And beginning about, more than a decade ago, we began to see a rise in suicide rates in adolescence, which was alarming. But then, even more terrifying to me, because I'm also a parent, was that we began to see suicide rates go up not only in teens, but in tweens, which are children as young as 9 and 10. And, I had written a book about the women who made New York, which included women from all different backgrounds, incredible activists like Antonia Pantoja, who was a Puerto Rican who came to New York and sort of saw a problem and figured out what they needed to do to fix it. And I kind of became obsessed with this question: how do we prevent these harms from happening to children? Social media has just been distributing terrible ideas to kids at scale. It's been making it difficult for them to be children. It's been exposing them to all kinds of harmful content, racism, hate speech, unhealthy beauty standards. And I just couldn't take it anymore. So, MAMA is Mothers Against Media Addiction, and we are a grassroots movement of parents and allies from every background and every place in the nation working together to fight back against media addiction and create a world where real life experiences and interactions remain at the heart of a healthy childhood.
That's awesome. I love it. And, from someone who comes from those two, Google and Facebook, I worked there. I understand what really drives a lot of those algorithmic kind of, I want to say, the feed to children. And although they've been held under the microscope about what they've been doing, they still refuse to hold back on putting very critical parameters around what kids see. Because even in the app stores, right, which that is a third party, which they try to separate themselves from, is that they say, well, they're the ones that are supposed to have responsibility. Then it's like, well, the devices actually have a lot of the responsibility. But those are just the platforms like Apple, the iPhone, and Android. Those are the rails, right? They are the ones feeding it, and it's all very integrated. Once people understand that ads really drive the algorithm and what they're seeing is how the kids really get hooked onto this. So, Julie, I know I want to talk a little bit about this because when I work there, I say there's a lot of nerds that work there. And I do mean the most elite nerds. And I love nerds. I'm a nerd myself, especially a data nerd. But I didn't go to the elite schools. But what I do know is that they focus on behavior. That is the whole reason why we, even as adults, are addicted to our phones, because we feel it's just something that needs to manage us when we should be managing it as a tool. So, I want to talk a little bit about what I call addictive design.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a reason we're called Mothers Against Media Addiction. I mean, this really isn't about our phones or the apps or any one thing. This is about the fact that we as a society are completely addicted to media. We have technology and screens everywhere you go now. They're in our cars, they're in our restaurants, they're in our waiting rooms, they're in our elevators. But our brains and bodies were not actually designed to be taking in a 24/7 fire hose of electronic stimulation. So, what's happening is that all of this sort of inundation of news, information, ideas, pictures, it's physiologically overwhelming us, and it's putting our brains and bodies in a state of fight or flight, which contributes to emotional disturbance. It contributes to feeling unwell. And that's part of why all of us feel so unwell and why our kids are unwell. But the addictive design and sort of the nerds you were talking about, There's a great movie called The Social Dilemma that looks at how the men, because they were all pretty much men and white men who designed these platforms, they wrote algorithms that would addict. In a lawsuit from the government against TikTok, documents came out that showed internally they know someone only has to watch TikTok for 25 minutes to become addicted. And so there wasn't all of this data available when I was writing my stories, but I knew from talking to kids that they were getting ideas, for example, about suicide that for all of previous history, children wouldn't have even heard, a 10-year-old shouldn't even know that word, right? How suddenly were kids across every racial, ethnic, income, regional difference all seeing an increase in suicide? And it was because these algorithms were pushing whatever content would keep people online the longest. And, human nature, we're wired to look at whatever is extreme, whatever is disturbing. And that's why the algorithms always serve up more and more dystopic, weirder, inappropriate content.
Right. And I think also when you talk about the addictive part of it, of us, there's a curiosity factor. And this was like the television, like, this is how old we are, folks, or at least I am. When the TV came out and I was really little, my grandmother had a television and she always used to say, don't watch too much television. You're going to hurt your eyes, right? Like, we turn off but the TV was on 24/7 because she was watching the news all the time. So it was kind of weird. We lived with my grandmother, by the way. But she was always telling us, don't watch the television because of the content that would come out through the television. And I thought that was really interesting, right? And I thought, why is she telling me not to watch the television so much, right? Because you would just sit there and plant yourself. The phone is just another version of the television and how we get our content.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I would actually argue that it's worse than the television because it's in our pocket. It follows us into our bathrooms. It follows us into the subways, everywhere. And the television's programs weren't designed to measure your every millisecond of a response, which goes into the algorithm so that they know what is more likely to be sticky for you. When I was writing about tween suicide, we didn't have data about how much self-harm content was online. But you can look this up yourself. Last September, Meta put out a press release, and Meta is the company that owns Instagram and Facebook, about how great they are because they were trying to limit self-harm and suicide content online. And buried at the very bottom of the press release, they acknowledged taking action on 13 million pieces of self-harm and suicide content last year, just during a 3-month period. So if you do the math, right, that's, our kids are just being exposed to millions and millions of pieces of content that no parent wants their child to see. And the direct result of that is that we are now in a national emergency in youth mental health. And that was declared by the American Academy of Pediatrics and 2 other medical associations a few years ago. And that's what I want parents to know and care about.
Yeah. And just also, people know that Facebook and Meta, Facebook was Facebook. Then they changed to Meta because they were getting shit posted about the content. They were not keeping back from not just adults, but also this. So they had to have like a brand change, and Meta became a part of it because they want to go into the metaverse. And they're like, oh, Facebook is this old thing. No, it's still there. They also own WhatsApp. And now they've done the lens camera with the Ray-Bans so that they can capture as much data from us to keep these algorithms going. We're going to talk a little bit about these AI algorithms and the chatbots that kids are really getting into these days. But before we get into that, Julie, I want to talk a little bit about Mama, because you're very proactive in this and understanding this. And you talked about why you decided to do this. Can you specifically tell me, like, when that moment happened, what were you galvanized? Like, what was the North Star for you to say, I just can't talk about this and start this organization. I really have to do something, like pushing policy, or how you've started these chapters and, how it's just taken off. I really want to hear about that.
Well, I don't usually cry on podcasts, and I'm going to try not to do that today. But when I was reporting on the deaths of 9 and 10-year-old children, I started, to figure out who I was going to write about. I started collecting the specific stories about individual children, and I collected their photographs on my computer. And I had a photo album of dead children. And these children were so beautiful, and they were from every walk of life. And there was this one, actually Hispanic girl who had her hair in a thick braid that looked just like my sister when she was little. And I thought, my God, I mean, it was so gross to me that we have allowed these tech companies to do whatever they want so that a couple of billionaires can make a few more dollars. It's disgusting to me. Money is not the only thing in the world. And so, there has unfortunately always been suicide in the human condition, and suicide has always been quite rare among children. But historically, suicide was always the third leading cause of death for tweens after accidents and disease. And what happened is since smartphones and social media, it became the second leading cause of death. And I thought, my God, the social media is causing more kids to die than every form of cancer combined, and that's just not okay with me. And so, and because of who your listeners are, I hope it's okay if I share this, and this is going to be upsetting, so brace yourself. But unfortunately, suicide rates have always been highest in Native American children and white children. And luckily, suicide rates were lower in Hispanic and Black children. And what we saw between 2010 and 2019 is that the suicide rate among Hispanic children increased 92.3%. I mean, 92.3%. This is madness. And so, unfortunately, no one has been sounding the alarms. And I decided it was my job to sound the alarm and to say to parents nationwide, we have to stand up and we have to insist that safeguards are in place and that these products are not available to kids unless they're safe for kids. We wouldn't let our kids have access to food supply that wasn't safeguarded, or we wouldn't let our kids be in a vehicle if the vehicle wasn't inspected and we didn't have traffic signs and lights. We absolutely need the same kind of safeguards for technology products.
Yeah, no, 100%. There has to be more engagement in the parental aspect here. So I want to talk about the phones before we get into AI, because we are going to dive into that and what specifically is happening that we need to be aware of. I want to talk about a very big issue right now because of ICE and everything that's happening, and that is actually giving kids access to phones, especially in schools. Many parents would advocate that with the current environment, they want their kids to have the phone with them at all times, and that's valid. But I feel like right now, if you look at the media spin doctor who's running in the White House, this is a man-made pandemic of fear, in my opinion, and a lot of people are starting to say this. So they are on their phones more. But if they're going to school, are they using their phones and keeping their phones more? Or if they're at home, are they using phones for school? So I want to talk a little bit about this, Julie, because you have a little bit of information around this and your thoughts. I want to get your thoughts on it because that's a very touchy subject for a lot of school districts. And I think actually before this all came down, your organization was a part of kind of helping mandate a very strict phone policy in New York, correct?
That is correct. We have a three-part mission at Mama. It's parent education, getting phones out of schools, and demanding safeguards. And, I'm glad you said what you said about our own adult addiction, because I'm media addicted. I'm not out here blaming parents for it. But what I want parents to know is that it's not our fault. This is by design. We wouldn't put our children in a casino and then yell at them because they couldn't stop playing slot machines. We figured out that tobacco is addictive, alcohol is addictive, gambling is addictive. With all those products, we don't let minors use them. But somehow we've given these things to our children, and then we have frustration that they're on it all the time, but it's not really their fault that they can't stop. So, to get to your questions about phones in school, I have no problem with flip phones. And I understand if families are concerned about their safety and they want to be able to reach their child, why they might want their child to have a flip phone. The problem with smartphones is that they're not really phones, right? They're miniature supercomputers, and they have access to the internet. They have access to social media. And what we have heard from teachers nationwide is that during class time, instead of paying attention to math or geometry or geography, they're watching Netflix, they're online shopping, they're downloading pornography. And in some cases, they're online bullying. And so we've seen an increase in all of these antisocial behaviors. We've seen an increase nationwide in kids fighting in schools. I mean, fights happen and children are learning how to manage their emotions. But when I was growing up, if a fight broke out, everybody jumped in to try and break it up. Now kids are taking out their phones and recording it and sharing it because they think they can get likes. And so, what we've heard over and over again from teachers, from mental health professionals, from physicians is that unless we preserve the experience of being with your friends and being with your teachers and making eye contact and having conversations and having fun, that children are not acquiring the basic building blocks they need for good social, emotional, and academic health. And the other problem that we have is that by giving them the phones, we're exposing them to dangerous content. So we are seeing situations where in some communities, gangs have showed up at schools because during the day they'll text and they'll set up a fight, and principals will suddenly be shocked because there's a fight on their grounds. We're seeing crazy things. There's new apps talking about the AI that they're called nudification apps, and you put in a photograph and it renders somebody naked. So kids do dumb things. They're kids, it's natural, but they're doing this and causing harm to other people that is like catastrophic. So, it's not fair to put kids in that situation, and that's why we advocate for phone-free schools so that from bell to bell they can be present. And also, when you and I were growing up, we didn't live in constant terror that our most embarrassing moment could be filmed and published so the whole world could see it. And children today are living under this pressure. And so when the phones are gone, there's so much relief. And what we hear over and over again, that kids are so stressed out. The CDC even reported that 17% of Hispanic high school students reported having serious thoughts of suicide, including 23% of females and 11% of males in 2019. So, we need to help our kids. They're struggling and we need to make the world saner for them.
Right. And I think if they know, I mean, it's a big pushback against a major wave of being accepted. And you're absolutely right. There is studies out there that if the younger that you give your kid a phone, and the more addictive they become because everybody wants to be separated. I mean, I can't tell you, like, when I go to public places, I literally do not try to get on my phone just so I can look up and look at people. And I look at everybody in the airport, on public transportation, whatever, and they're all looking down.
Right. And look what that's done to us as a society. I mean, first of all the time on screens is creating what some people call digital dementia. Your grandmother was right. The human eye is not supposed to stare at blue light all day. And globally now, the whole world is seeing an increase in myopia, which is nearsightedness. Children are not getting to adulthood free from needing glasses because normally, naturally, you're supposed to look at different lengths of distance. In Taiwan, actually, they saw this problem and they instituted a law that required every child to go out and play for 2 hours. That was the solution. And within 2 years, they ended the problem of the myopia crisis. Isn't that amazing? So, you know, there's trillion-dollar companies that are spending a lot of money to convince us all that if you don't have the latest device, if you don't have the newest product, if your kid doesn't get the app, you're going to be quote unquote left behind. But it's not true. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates did not grow up with computers. They still became inventors. And in fact, Steve Jobs, Jobs, he told the New York Times that he wouldn't let his kids use the iPad because he wanted them to be creative. And so we're seeing, I think, too many parents who are buying what they're selling, and they should not trust these big tech companies.
Yeah, and that's bad for them because they're just constantly trying to convince us how cool it is and how cool we look with all the latest gear as well. So, I mean, it's a hard stop, to say the development issue is real, non-social engagement instead of engaging online and bullying, right? It's severe bullying and the suicide rate amongst teens is real. It is very real. And then when we talk about the developmental stage of people moving into a society of even as they get into college and post college, they're seeing a decline in people trying to meet each other and to have a relationship. It is more difficult because of this now engagement. And I think there's a statistic I saw. There is a direct correlation between social media and relationships. And the more online exposure you've had, it's like the less engaged you are in wanting to create a relationship. And I want to talk about men specifically, right? Because men are having the hardest time. And I'm not advocating for men, but right now, all the things we're seeing today, right, in this construct of fear and what's happening is all being driven through a lot of white male anger. And I don't know where that's coming from. I think I do.
I mean, look, I do advocate for men because I'm the mother of 3 boys, and I believe we want all our children to grow up and be healthy and thrive, and when they were little, they were wild animals, and teaching them how to be civilized. One of them would say, "Can you pass me that?" And they threw it, and it hit the Lego, and the Lego broke, and the other one would jump at his neck to choke him, and I realized I was spending, like, all my time as their mother trying to train them to slow down and not react immediately, to think and be patient. And when I let them play video games, as soon as they got off, they were wild again. And it was because the video games are designed to get them to react as quick as possible. And so if we're constantly exposing our children to an environment online that rewards them for going as quick as possible. And it trains their brain that you don't have to be bored for even a fraction of a second. If you don't like it, you could just swipe right. And there's always another video and it's an endless scroll. Of course, they're not going to be able to show up with real people and have patience and be able to be in a human relationship. So, everything you mentioned is what we've been hearing. Business owners are just like worried about the next generation of workers. How are they going to function if they can't handle conversations? Some young people spend so much time online, they're not comfortable getting a phone call. They don't know how to talk to people. They prefer to text. That's a problem and not good for communities. And then, yes, I have heard people talk about worrying about, a decline in people getting married and having children and all of those things. I mean, to answer your question about where the toxic stuff is coming from, I think we just have to go back to the algorithms, which they're computer bots, they're zeros and ones. So they don't know what it is, but they promote whatever is most sticky, whatever makes you stay on the longest. And what the studies have shown is that content that is negative makes people stay online longer. So if it gets you angry, if it ticks you off, if it blames somebody, if it creates an other, makes an enemy, you're more likely to stay on. And unfortunately, that means we've seen an increase in hate groups. We've seen an increase in white supremacy. We've seen an increase in the Andrew Tates of the world and other people who think that that's somehow acceptable, which it's not.
Yeah, toxic masculinity and also how the bullying, especially amongst women as well, has just I just saw that there is a online influencer through TikTok who's trying to get women to count their calories and also to like be skinny. But it's like, no, it's about weight management. And it's like, no, this woman went online and she wrote about it, talking about how she saw a bunch of teenagers on there and that she said this is not supposed to be, they're supposed to be like guardrails and gatekeeping about how old you are to get into these groups. And she said she saw a lot of high school girls that were in this chat group, and it's very much like peer driven, and it's just disgusting. And it's like I think back again because I'm old, but I have wisdom, and that's why we're here. Is magazines, that's what all of them were. All these beauty magazines were about. They still do it today. How skinny you are. I'd rather be skinny than fat, and fat shaming and all the things. And I just want to give a shout out to Dove, right, as a product line, that they're like, you are beautiful no matter how you look.
That is the message that kids need. And Dove even last year, they became the first company to make a public pledge that they will never use AI models. They will only use real women. And I think that's so powerful. I mean, you're right. I work with a mother whose daughter was not allowed to have Instagram, but went to a friend's house, created an account. She was only 11 or 12, and Instagram sent her recommended a post that was hashtag pro Anna. And she's like, "Who's Anna?" And she clicked on it, and pro Anna was pro anorexia. And so it took her down a rabbit hole. Thankfully, her daughter is alive and thriving, but we're talking about a decade of struggle with eating disorders. And, that's something that I hope your listeners take away is that, really think hard about what your children have access to. Delay giving them a device as long as possible. And then once they have it, sit with them and see what they're seeing, because it's only when you realize how horrible some of this stuff is and what gets through that you understand what our children are being exposed to at scale. It doesn't take very long. There are parents that we work with that have, even a Washington Post reporter set up a test account, pretended to be a 13-year-old and set up one of these quote unquote teen accounts. And it only took 5 minutes for them to start sending the most horrific content. So parents need to know these things look shiny and pretty, but they are not safe for kids.
Absolutely. And even though Instagram has said, oh, they have the teen privacy accounts, it doesn't matter. They can have a gatekeeping, as they say, but the ads still come through and they still find out your profile through your IP address of your home. So, I mean, it doesn't go away. It's all bullshit. They just try to say that because they're already having their feet held to the fire in a bunch of lawsuits. So they have to do this to say we're doing something, just like the cigarette companies did, just like the cigarette companies that said, oh, we're going to promote like how you get cancer from cigarettes and stop smoking. And what did people do? They started smoking more. They sold more. So, I mean, it is a reverse type of algorithm, just like the television programming back in the day. So listen to me, your Thea, and listen to Julie when we tell you we understand what's going on here from a journalistic perspective of research and understanding stories that are being given on that large of a scale, and me working there and understanding that these things are run by ads, by companies that are paying for ads and how they get fed through a neural network of behavior. So if they know your friends are 15 years old, or you have a group of friends, they're going to feed you the things that you want to see because someone in your group has that, and it's all behavior based. So I'm going to go into like something that's really troubling, and this is around games, Julie, because you mentioned gaming today through the apps, and we didn't even get into this, but there's going to be another part to this I want to call Mothers Against Media Addiction, but it's going to be with somebody in Canada who's not on your chapter, but her name is Rosalia, and she's part of the Brave movement, which is a whole other topic we're going to talk about. And that's something for you guys to tune in after this podcast. What I want to talk about is gaming and the apps that are available through the stores. One thing that's happening if you're a gamer, you're on Twitch and you're sharing your information, you're in these rooms, these chat rooms, there's chat bots, there's apps that you can download. One thing that happened that's not being talked about enough is the young man that shot himself. And this was in the New York Times, and everybody can look it up because he downloaded an app that was a realistic version of Daenerys Targaryen. He wanted to have a girlfriend online. He was, I believe, 15 years old. He was very young. He engaged in this game, AI generated like a friend that you can create. And he wanted Daenerys Targaryen as his girlfriend.
So, okay, parents, I feel like I'm the Grim Reaper. I show up to these interviews and I tell you all these things to be scared about. But I promise you, in a minute, we're going to talk about how we can make change and the successful change we are making. But yes, unfortunately, AI chatbots are also not safe for kids. And there have been a number of very worrisome examples recently of some of the type of outputs that these chatbots give young people and adults. So the Wall Street Journal had a blockbuster investigation that showed how Meta's chatbots role play very risky grooming behaviors and even bizarre sexual scenarios with young users. They even mimic voices of popular celebrities and characters from children's media. So AI chatbots are not safe for kids. Part of why this is such a big problem and why I created Mama is because currently there are no regulations in place that prevent them from sharing these unsafe products with your children. These are defective products. If there was slivers of wood in baby formula, we would immediately recall them. And the only reason we haven't recalled social media is because a law passed a few years ago called Section 230 that says social media platforms are not liable for the content on their platforms. And the law was passed when they argued that they were just neutral spaces like phone lines, but phones don't amplify certain types of content. You don't have Verizon every time there's something horrible, they don't amplify it and call everybody up and give them that information, which is exactly what social media does. So we've been advocating for legislation that puts kids' safety first, and California became the first state, followed by Maryland, and just last week, followed by Nebraska and Vermont. And they passed a law called the Age Appropriate Design Code, or the KIDS Code. And this legislation requires that these platforms be safe by design for kids. And one of the things they do, for example, is by default, all the privacy settings would be the most private. That way, strangers can't contact your children, pedophiles can't contact your kids and pretend to be other kids and ask for inappropriate photos. So, those are the kinds of legislative changes we need to make sure the products are safe. And with AI, let me tell you, the tech bros are very close to the government in Washington. And in this big, beautiful bill, somebody slipped a provision in there that would prohibit states from enforcing any regulation on AI for the next 10 years. This is so terrifying. Mama's community immediately went into action. We sent over 3,000 letters to Congress saying, you have to take this out. It's not just us. 40 attorneys general, bipartisan, got together and said, you have to take that out because the states are really at the forefront right now of keeping kids safe.
Yep. Well, some of them, as we just heard. And yeah, and just I'm going to quote Kara Swisher here from the Pivot podcast where she says, tech bros is technology broken. So, I mean, that's what it stands for because they really have broken it. And it is by design what is happening right now. It is by design as a hands off. There is no coincidence why all of them were standing up there during his inauguration. I'm not going to even say his name. But the reason why they were all standing there is because there were lawsuits under 230, Julie, that they were coming under. There's also a lot of monopoly and antitrust going on. But when you talk about the data and the algorithms, Mike Johnson, and this is true, Mike Johnson just approved in Louisiana, the state that he's from, that Mark Zuckerberg can open up a huge data center in some area, I forget what it is, and he can go ahead and open up the data center because of more data and AI aggregation.
$10 billion they're spending on that in Louisiana. And don't forget, the Kids Code, so the federal legislation, excuse me, not the Kids Code, the Kids Online Safety Act, which is KOSA, which is very important legislation everyone should support, had bipartisan support in the Senate last year. Despite our politics, 91-3, they voted to pass it. It went to the House. It had 64 co-sponsors, 32 Republican, 32 Democrat. Mike Johnson refused to bring it for a vote. And then Steve Scalise, who's the majority leader, also from Louisiana, said it was bad law, which nobody understood because it was such a bipartisan bill. And then, I mean, maybe it was a coincidence, but they both happen to be from Louisiana. And suddenly they're announcing this huge multi-billion dollar investment from Meta. It was deeply disappointing. And we're getting low on time here. I mean, the reason I created Mama is because we need all of us, moms, dads, aunts, uncles, grandparents, to join together and stand up and fight back. We have to demand change, that our lawmakers do their job and ensure that these products are safeguarded the same way we ensure safeguards for every other consumer product. And there's a lot to learn. We've covered so much in this podcast, but at our website, wearemama.org, we have fact sheets about Phone for Schools. We have fact sheets about what you need to know for AI. And you can find out if there's a chapter near you or start a chapter. We really want to get more Latinx and Hispanic women involved and leading chapters because those communities deserve to have leadership who understands exactly what these tech bros are doing. They are not looking out for people. They want a future where we're all machines and we have little chips in our head and we just spend all of our money and give it to them. And that's not the future we want.
100%. And everything you just said, I mean, again, by design, and it's profits over people. So yes, Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, he's the one that shut that kids, the COSA Act, which would protect kids online. So I want everyone to take that in their hat when they're showing up at the polls. The most peaceful protest you can do right now is showing up at the primaries and voting people out that are harming our kids, hurting our communities, and not being equitable about how we can live in this life. These tech bros do not even let their kids get online. And there is a reason for that because they understand how it all works in this ecosystem. So, Julie, I know I'm getting very worked up here. You said everything. And it's like, I am so grateful for you and Mama existing. You've given us your website. But what is the one thing we can take away besides all of us coming together and starting more chapters? What is the one thing you would say from a parent's perspective and having 3 boys?
Learn what this tech is about. There is nothing free in life. And if you think it's free, it's not free. They are using your child to make profit. And so even though, look, I have, like I said, 3 boys, I didn't let my first one watch any TV. By the second one, I would plop him in front of video because I needed a break. And childcare is expensive and it's hard. But if you plop them in front of a screen now, it's going to be 10 times harder when they're in school and they're not able to concentrate and read. It's going to be 100 times harder when they're a teenager and they don't know how to make social relationships and emotional connections. So fight back. Refuse to give over your child to the tech universe. And please visit our website, wearemama.org, to learn more. Teresa, one other thing, I don't know exactly when this will air, but on Monday, June 23rd, I'll be in Washington for Social Media Victims Remembrance Day. I don't even know if parents realize, but it's an official government holiday now. And it was started by 2 moms whose sons died the same day because of social media harms in 2 completely different states. We don't want to lose any more kids.
No more kids need to be put at risk through these platforms. And we are the leaders of that. Parents and friends and tias and tios, primos, primas, everybody involved in the community. Let's take more action into how our phone uses and how we want to be more proactive in helping our kids and the community. So thank you, Julie, for joining me today on Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Resources and information will be in the show notes. So please, everybody, go to our website at latinasb2b.com and also anywhere you get your podcast or YouTube. Please follow us on YouTube where you can get all the information as well as Julie's website, wearemama.org.
That's right. And thank you so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Thank you, Julie. Gracias.
Gracias.
What an incredible conversation with Julie today. If you are not inspired to take action, I know there's a lot happening in the world today, but the most vulnerable are our children. And if there's anything we can do to help them, it is how we lead in this movement forward with protecting our kids, helping them not feel scared in this moment, and having the engagement we need and the connection so they don't go online to find these vulnerable spots within their smartphones. So before we share how you can get involved, I want to repeat again our crisis resources because this conversation touched on serious mental health topics. So again, if you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please reach out to help immediately. You can call or text 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's free, confidential, and available 24 hours, 7 days a week. You can also text HOME, that's HOME, to 741-741 for the crisis text line. For teens especially, the teen line is available at 1-800-852-8336. Remember, asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. So if you're feeling inspired to take action, I hope you are, because I am, and I met Julie and I am activated, which is why she was here today. Now you can get involved with the movement that's actually winning battles for our kids. You can visit Mama's website at wearemama.org. That is wearemama.org. There you'll find a chapter to locate and connect with other parents in your area or who are fighting in the same fight as you are. You may even want to start a chapter yourself, and there's information on how you can get the resources to help you get started. And remember, Mama went from 0 to 35 chapters across 22 states in just over a year. So you can follow up with Mama on social media too. They are on Instagram as well as Facebook. But that's there for the parents to also know there is help, resources available for when they are online to help their kids. Gracias for joining me today, Julie. And thank you, mi gente, for listening. Please subscribe and follow us across wherever you listen to your podcast, especially YouTube. On their channel, we are at Latinas B2B, and that's B, number 2, B. Gracias. This podcast was produced and also sponsored by 5E Leadership and Marketing. Executive producer is Teresa E. Gonzalez, and audio and engineered and co-produced by Robert Lopez. You can find more information about us at latinasb2b.com, and please follow us on all of our socials at Latinas B2B. That's Instagram. We're also on Blue Sky. We're on YouTube and also LinkedIn. Teresa is also an advocate in speaking against media and social media addiction. If you'd like to have her as a speaker, please contact us at info@latinasb2b.com for any guest inquiries on other podcasts, or if you'd like to have her speak at your event. Gracias.